Hey there, Transformers. Welcome to Work Transformed, the podcast that tackles the ever-evolving world of product development, project chaos, and everything in between. Each episode, we'll dive into the hottest trends, unpack the latest tools, and chat with inspiring guests who are leading the charge. So, buckle up, get ready to transform your work, and let's do this.
All right. Welcome to the podcast with Thomas Lenore and Jackie Bittner. I'm going to be your host today. I think we're going to do a little sharing of the host seat. So Thomas, say hello.
Hello, everybody.
I'm going to say so they know you're here and I'm not making it up.
No, I'm here. I'm here for real. Trust me.
Awesome. Well, on today's episode, I've got a topic I want us to dive into. And I think it's going to be a pretty fun ride. So one thing I was talking about with some connections recently is just this idea of change management, which got me thinking a lot about different change management practices. And, you know, there's all kinds of different schools of thought out there. But really what I want to get into today is resistors and how in the world do you work through these resistors that pop up when change is afoot, because change is hard. And so there is a natural resistance to change. I know my 4-year-old, if I tell him to do something, he says, "Mom, you don't have to tell me what to do." So not so much the 4-year-old world, but the business world. I'm super curious about two things specifically.
What?
One, consider your resistors. What has happened? What are some experiences that we've had where maybe we've made a mistake in dealing with resistors, and what have we learned? And then two, I'm also curious about what things, now that we've grown in our careers and our roles, what are some of our strategies, our best strategies to kind of navigate through resistors and make sure they don't become distractors and all of that. So I really just want to get into those two areas.
You know, I've been really quiet, but I'm excited. Little fact, we just told our topic 2 minutes before we started recording. So there's no involvement prep, at least on my side. Maybe Jackie prep, but I said not prep. But I actually love this topic because in my career, I think resistors has been one of the most recurring themes. Like, no matter what you try to roll out, what kind of solutions you bring in, what type of new technologies, there's usually always someone or some people who are like, "Nope, not today. I'm not having it." And so I am excited because over the years, to your point, I've done some things that I was like, "Wow, I can't believe I did that, and I can't believe it worked." And I've done some things where I'm like, "Wow, can't believe I did that. Hope I don't get fired." So
Okay.
At the beginning, like maybe we got some college students. I mean, I think this is episode 2, so I don't know how many viewers we have, but maybe we got some college students. They don't know what a disruptor is. They don't know what a resistor is. They don't know these terms. Can we just start at the beginning? Like, what does that mean to be a resistor to something in a change management sense?
Yeah, one thing that I love about the terminology is that it's really right in there. So when you're
That is true.
So, well, I think that's why I came up with the example of the 4-year-old, just resisting a simple direction. And it's our nature when we think that something is working a certain way to want it to work that certain way. But then, and then we resist a change. And I think that's the overall topic of change management, why it's so important to make sure you set up change properly, is so that people aren't automatically in this resistant state. So a lot of times when there's a change, there's a purpose for it. Sometimes it's not communicated. Sometimes it is. But these resistors are folks that really don't like the change. They either don't understand why these things are happening or the processes are changing. They may not see where they fit in the future. They may be apprehensive. There might be fear. So a lot of resistance comes from a lot of these different emotional places that we find ourselves in as humans that are working together. And so in change management, we talk about change resistors broadly as folks that are not feeling that change. They're not aligned to it. They're not going to help you. They will not champion you along. They're going to dig their heels in the sand and just let you drag them or they try to drag you down. So that is my non-professional way of explaining it.
I think it's important to also point out, because I think sometimes resistors get a bad rap. I think there are people who are conscious resistors who are resisting for the sake of being difficult, resisting for the sake of being an a-hole, resisting for the sake of like, I've been here this long, you're new, I'm not going to let you come in here and change up the show. But I think we also underestimate the fact that resistance is a part of the human psyche that wants to hold on to the things that they understand. Like a lot of people in life will say they don't like change, and it's not because they don't like the thing that is happening, the change that's taking place. It's just the fact that like I've grown comfortable with this way of working or this tool or system, and like I am now nervous that maybe I can't do it. Maybe I'm not going to be able to live up to these new expectations. And so, that doesn't mean we shouldn't work with resistors and try to help them overcome those barriers. But I do want to point out that like not everyone's doing it just for the sake of being rude and like stopping progress. Like some people legitimately are just so very worried or unclear, like to your point of how they fit in, that they're like, hey, I don't know about this. Let's take a shield pill on this for a moment. And so like I just want to throw that out there. I don't know if that helps anyone.
That's awesome, because now you got me thinking in a different way. Like, yeah, resistors doesn't have to necessarily be negative connotation word. Like, sure, some people are going to be jerks about it, but we'll talk about them. But there are also resistors that are really helpful in that they might be the subject matter experts, and they could highlight a big gap in the change that's about to happen and tell you the impact of doing it, and really help that change management team navigate some of these like situations where maybe they didn't have the insight or the information at that time. So I guess resistors can fall on a scale of being resistors that are helpful, ones that are kind of neutral and are just nervous and need some guidance, and then ones that really just don't want to do anything and are going to be a pain in your backside.
Well, I'll throw this in here now. I don't actually know if this is where I should talk about it now, but I actually think about this a lot in this from the perspective of like new product adoption. I was in a class in college and it stuck with me all these years. So I can't even tell you what class it was. Maybe e-com, maybe marketing, who knows? But this one concept stuck with me all these years. And it was like the adoption curve. At the very far left-hand side, you have the early adopters, the people who are like, I don't care what the change is. I want to try it. I want to get in there on the ground floor so I can be among them. So I can be this elitist group that says like, I was the first person to know. I was the first person to be involved in this. And like, those are the people who are going, they might not always even be the best adopters because they're not always going to even try. They just want to be in the group. But like, those are the people who you don't have to worry about. Whatever you say, they're going to be like, yep, let's do it. Then you have the general public, the people who are just like, I neither hate it necessarily nor love it. It's just like, I know that this is what we're doing. I know this is what you expect of me. I'm just going to give it my best shot. And then you have the late adopters. And those are the people who are typically either the conscious dissenters or the people who are just fearful, nervous, unclear. And so that's where, at least from my perspective, I actually find the most value. To your point earlier that like sometimes people who are, not in favor of the change are also helpful. I find that long tail at the end of people who either consciously are dissenting or just are too nervous to get on board, they are the most helpful because they are the ones who are actually going to be able to push back on the plan in a way, and sometimes it's helpful and sometimes it's frustrating. Because the early adopters, they're going to just go with it. They're just like, okay, great. They might give you a little bit of feedback, but for the most part, they're just running after the thing. And then by the time they get to the destination, they're probably early adopters for something else. So they've already moved on a whole new initiative. The general public, it's going to take them so long to like get on board, get trained, get the familiarity, understand the process, understand the goals, that they're probably giving you some feedback, but still not even clear themselves on the outcome that you're looking for. But it's those people who are late adopters who are like, why are we doing this? And you're like, let me better articulate the why. It's like, what are the outcomes? What are the goals? And it's like, we had high level goals, but you're right. I don't have tangible metrics that I can give you. So let me restate those. It's like, how have we considered all the impacts that it'll have downstream, or have we considered the tooling changes that are required? You're like, maybe I didn't, or maybe I did. And those are the people I actually find, no matter how difficult they are to work with, which I think we need to talk about too, but like those are the people who I find that actually give you such valuable nuggets that I will be honest, there have been times, I'm going to think of an example by the end of the podcast, but there have been times where I actually changed directions because of those late adopters, because they came up with such great questions and points. I was like, you know what? We thought about this at such a high level, and it was a very practical decision. But now that we're talking about the actual execution of it, there are some glaring misses where we didn't even consider that. We didn't, or beyond consider it. I'm not a subject matter expert in all things, and especially when you get to software development. I am a subject matter expert on the process of software development. I'm an expert on having the right KPIs, having the right workflows, removing barriers and impediments. I am not a Python expert. I'm not a Java expert. I am not someone who's going to spin up a cluster in AWS. Like, so there are things I literally just don't
Shocking.
know. I know. Who would have thought?
Let me throw a quick tangent in here. Let's do a little brain break. I have a pop quiz. I'll answer too. Where do you fall, Thomas, on this adoption curve? Because I too remember learning about this and I was like fascinated by this, and I knew immediately where I was not.
So I have been a change management practitioner for 10 or so years, project management professional for 12 or so years. Where do you think I would fall, Jackie?
Excellent.
And you know me personally. So like, where do you think on this gradient I am falling?
I really like how you flipped it around. And
I'm actually curious what you think. I have an answer. I've told many people this answer before because it comes up frequently enough.
Well, I do know you. I know that you have a general interest in how things work. You, to me, have a curious mind and you want to learn about the cool new tools and tweaking the new stuff that you could get. And starting a business with you has really shown me how amazing you are at, like, what do you think of this tool? And I'm like, what is that? So I would tend, if I had to like give my best educated guess, I would say you are somewhere within the early adopter to general public area. Not so far on the early adopter side, because you do want to have some thought in there, but I think that's something that you could see a value in, really interests you, and you run with it. You want it to get there. You want to see it. You want to do it. You want to love it.
It's interesting you say that, because that's not the perspective I have on myself. But you brought out some really great points, so maybe I don't, give myself enough credit. So, and I also guess it kind of, for me, is depending on, like, am I owning the change? Like, am I the change champion, the person who is pushing out the thing, or am I the recipient? I have always thought about this question from the lens of I am the recipient. I am just a person who is at the organization as a change is being rolled out, and I am a absolute late adopter. I don't want to change anything. Once I know how to do my job, I want to do it that way for the rest of my life. And I tell people this all the time. They're always caught off guard because they're like, well, what do you mean? You're always changing things. And I'm like, I know, but I hate it. Like, when things change around me, I am so anxious because I am a creature of habit. Like, once I know how to do something, I just know how to do it. So when you say we're not going to use Jira anymore, we're going to move over and like start using Trello, or we're going to move over and like stop doing Scrum and we're going to do Kanban. It's like, oh my God, but I know how to do that so well. I don't want to move. And so I'm not a resistant system. I'm going to say like, I won't do it, but I'm definitely going to be slow on the uptake. And I'm going to ask a lot of questions. I want to get all the understanding so that when I do make the transition, I learn it properly and do it well enough so that I can just, find my new groove.
So interesting. I could see. So something that came to me is like, I think where you fall on that line depends on what role you're playing in that particular change.
Absolutely.
That's amazing. Amazing little highlight there. Where do you think I fall?
As the recipient, as the recipient of the change, I see you falling in this like middle bucket of like the general adopters. I don't see you being an early adopter. I see you are also just a very busy person. Like, having worked with you in different lives, and even now, you're doing so many things. I don't think you have the capacity to be like, I'm going to be the first person ever to do this. But I think you also like to be thoughtful, and I don't think you would want to wait till the end like I would. And you want to be early enough that you're still helping to work out the kinks. You're partnering with people. So I think you're somewhere in the middle, but not toward that. You're in the middle.
I would agree with that. Like, I don't think that I ever have an interest as a recipient of being like the earliest of adopters. Because, like, to your point, I want to make sure that I understand things, right? And maybe to a fault. I want to make sure I understand it. But I will also be your biggest cheerleader once I get there. And I'll be in that middle being like, yeah, let's do this. Hey, look, it's amazing. This is so great. This is going to all help us. If we all get this done, we don't have to do it anymore. Maybe I just like getting things done and then checking the box. I don't know. All right. Back to what
you talked about. You talked about cheerleading. So let's get into the actual meat and potatoes of this. Like, how do you, as a change leader or someone who's involved in the change initiative, how do you start to have conversations and dialogue with people who are very clearly and staunchly against the change? And let's give an example of a change to make things simpler. Let's say do you have an example? I won't make up a fake one. Go ahead.
No. make up the example. I was just going to start talking about things that I do without an example.
Maybe people don't need it, so go ahead.
I got very excited. So one of the things that I've done multiple times, right, been part of many transformation projects, and even the product development lifecycle in and of itself is like an exercise in change management. You're inspecting things as you're doing them, you're moving on to the next, and that can create some heartache for some folks if they didn't want to move on. So for like some of these bigger changes with teams that I've had, I usually hop into it thinking about the ways that my team might be thinking about it. And so I'm pulling a lot from like an empathetic state. Like, oh, I know this person uses this program for a lot of their work. This is going to be really disruptive. And so a lot of times I will just open it up, being kind of raw and real. Like, hey, this change is happening. I know that these things were communicated. I would like to give you the floor now to ask questions, to air grievances. And a lot of times this only really works well if you've already kind of established that trust and that bond with folks. Because a lot of times if you didn't, it'll be very, very quiet. But let me use a real example that I've done, and I will keep names out of this example. But there is a practice in the accounting world called software capitalization, and our accounting and finance
everybody's favorite thing.
It is everybody's favorite thing. Basically, it's a way to allocate the work that you do to these different buckets in the accounting world. I am not going any deeper than that. However, when you do this practice, usually as a public company, there is some inputs that you need from your population, which means there's a process that you need to roll out to your population. And what does an employee population love more than anything is new process. Just kidding. That was a joke.
Absolutely love it.
People, and so, and some people with that kind of process, since it is like related to the quote unquote amount of work you're doing, usually in a time sense, there's already a natural resistance built in, like, oh my goodness, you're going to micromanage me now. And so if you know these things are going to pop up, you can address them head on. Hey, this I think you're going to interpret as being micromanaging, but let me just step back and tell you what this data is not going to be used for. And you go through, this is not to be used to micromanage you. This is not to be used to know what your attendance is. I don't care about that. What this is used for, and then you go into the whys, right? But being able to say, almost with like a bigger impact is like, hey, what things are not going to happen as a result of this? Because you might be fearful of X, Y, Z.
I think that the only way that works is if you've proven to be a genuine and transparent leader. And I don't want to get into that at all on this call because that's a whole can of worms in itself. But that works super well when your people can trust that what you say is the truth. If you tell them you won't use that data that way and they can believe you, that's a super powerful technique. And it's what I've used several times because oftentimes what we don't want to do is we don't want to address people's fears head on. And I disagree with this, but it's a technique I've seen many leaders say, like, oh, we don't want to make any promises. We don't want to guarantee anything. We don't want to talk about that kind of subject. We want to stay away from it. You're staying away from it almost creates some.
It almost makes more anxiety.
Yeah, it's like, hey, look at this thing, because they won't even talk about it. Like the chat, 3 people have asked in the chat and they keep ignoring that question. There must be something here. That's why they don't want to talk about it. So going head on in the first conversation, said like, hey folks, I already know. Like, this is what I would think if I was in your shoes. This is how I would have taken this. Here's why that's not the case in this particular change. I think that's so powerful. And it goes to one of the things I was going to say.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, okay. I didn't know. You look like you're ready to go. One of the things I was going to say is I like to talk about changes early. A lot of times, and it will depend on the kind of change. There are certain changes that legally you can't talk about, or it's just not a good practice. A good example is like if you're doing an acquisition, like legally sometimes you can't share that until the deal is closed. So there is no early talking about it. It's just like you got to wait until the deal is done for the most part. But when there's something smaller, even things like organizational changes, we're reorganizing, we're coming up with a new org chart. There's going to be a new reporting structure. I like to start teeing up that conversation well before we're ready to roll it out, because I want folks to come along on the journey with me, like have the time to process. So I'll sometimes say, even if I don't like directly say like we're going to have a new org structure on January 1st, I'll say, folks, I want you to know it's becoming very apparent to me that what we're doing now isn't working. Here's an example of it. Karen told Diane, and Diane told Jim, and Jim told Spencer, and that took us 4 weeks when Diane could have told Spencer directly. And so like, I just keep showing them that there is a problem, there is a problem, there is a problem. So by the time I come to December and we're ready to actually announce the org change, they're like, oh, that makes a ton of sense, because all along Thomas has been saying, oh, that's inefficient. Oh, that's a problem. Oh, there's bottlenecks here. And it's like, they're not having to take my word that there was a problem and believe me when I say this is going to be a better org structure. They already are like, yeah, I see it. Like, this makes a ton of sense to me. And they've kind of come along the journey with me. And here's the secret added bonus. As I'm saying, here's the inefficiencies, they're likely going to say, I agree, Thomas. And one of the things I think could help us is blank. And sometimes you're like, haha, little do you know that's already in the works. But sometimes you're like, oh, really? Because that's the absolute opposite of what I was thinking. They're like, no, I can see why you think blank, but because of these other facets that you're not privy to because you sit at a level higher in the organization that doesn't deal with the process end to end, here's why this is a better thing. And so even me as a leader who's architecting the change, I can now say, oh, I better kind of course correct a little bit, and I haven't even rolled this thing out yet. Like, I'm already getting feedback on something that doesn't even exist technically.
Sneaky feedback, amazing. But that's great though. That's like another highlight. It's like this continuous communication and early involvement, right, is like really key, and some great practices to get people to move along with the change and not resist as heavily as they do. You mentioned something that sparked a thought about just leadership styles, and like sometimes you cannot release the details, like an M&A example. However, I went through this kind of example, and even though details couldn't be shared, some great leaders were being honest and authentic about sharing what they could share, meaning, let's talk about how this process just works in general. Let's talk about what the next steps will be, or what you're going to see in the future, and what the target timing is for like a proxy statement or like whatever that is. And so just hiding from it would have, again, ignited some more fear, this uncertainty, this nervousness, but even just like getting to some areas where what can you share, like being and address, I can't give details, but I'd love to step you through what to expect over the next 2, 4, 6, 8 weeks. And that to me ties back to how you want to be as a leader. And it actually ties back to one of our transformation catalyst values of being honest and authentic at the same time, right? I might pop into that that meeting about software capitalization and say, this will not be used to track your time and punish you for taking days off. And one way that I can hold that accountability to myself is if someone micromanages you about it, the first person you reach out to is me, because I will set up a one-on-one and I will reteach them how this data is used. And if they do not use it appropriately, I may restrict their access or something like that, right? Put my money where my mouth is, be my authentic self, be truthful, and then hold it to it.
So let me ask you this, Jackie. What do you do with the people who are just like a-holes for no reason? Like, they don't have a very valid reason. They're not saying like, oh, here's a better alternative, or here's why I don't agree. They're just like, that won't work. That's stupid. I don't want to do it. I'm not going to do it. Like, what are you doing with them?
Right. So I love that you brought this up, because I think that there are really fantastic ways to deal with folks like this. And it really depends on the setting that you're in with them. Let's pretend we're in a broad training session with multiple folks, and there is one person that is chiming in and resisting, that this training is even happening. And I don't understand, why the company even cares about this. After I've gone through the whys, after I've shared about the outcomes, after I've done some mitigating of some other fears that might be out there, I really start to lean on my facilitation techniques. And this may or may not have happened. I like to turn it back onto the resistor to follow up and do more. So if it's a training session, there's a multiple folks in it. I've said things like, hey, I really want to dive into this with you. It seems like you've got a lot of questions that you need to work out. Let's table those for now. I'm going to go through the training. Can you please reach out to me directly so that we could keep going through this? Because one, I will go through it. I will take that time and capture all of their concerns, because there might be a nugget of something that's super important. But I will share with you, 9 times out of 10, they don't follow up with me.
They're never going to reach out. Let me tell you that. They are never going to reach out.
Yes, but and so back to maybe switching gears to mistakes made. I used to do the opposite and tried to follow up with every single person that was this resistor that was not very nice, right? I would instead of the messaging be, oh, please schedule some time with me. I'd love to go through that with you. The messaging used to be, I'm going to schedule time with you and we're going to talk about it and we're going to go get coffees and we're going to talk about it and I'm going to do my best to hear it live. We're going to be the best. Yeah, you're going to understand why. You're going to see yourself in it. And I learned the hard way that is not what that type of resistor wants, needs, or cares about. And I wasted a lot of my energy and time focusing on them when ultimately they ended up leaving, or they ended up I've ended up pulling in maybe their superior to say, can you please help support why this is important, right? Because some of those resistors who are resistors for the sake of being troublemakers or problem makers or just generally unhappy about it but don't actually have any depth to what they can add to that conversation, is you kind of just ignore them. And they either come along with the rest of everybody that knows and understands and can champion things, or they get left behind.
Absolutely.
And I think the one thing hard to come to terms with as a empathetic human being that wants to have everybody come with them, right? But it's true.
I think there are two things that are hard about it. It's the disappointment of having to potentially leave someone behind, because a good leader cares about everybody, even the people who are difficult. A good leader cares about everyone. And so that's hard. I think the other thing that's hard, but is absolutely required, is for you to gain the courage and the voice and grow your internal voice to be loud enough to speak to those people, because often those are the people who have the loudest voice in the room. They have a lot of influence. They've probably been there a long time, so that's why they're comfortable even saying things like this out loud. Because a lot of things they say are borderline disrespectful and insubordinate at times, and you have to be really comfortable in your tenure to even say some of the things I've heard and have been told in my time. And so, oftentimes, especially if you're new to an organization, maybe not new to the role, but you're new to the organization and have done this other place, you're like, oh my God, I don't want to step on any landmines. I don't want to say the wrong thing. Oh my goodness, that person's so upset. And then what you do is you minimize yourself. And you say, okay, well, it seems like maybe there's a lot of confusion. Maybe we'll talk about this another time. Or maybe we'll figure something else out. I'll come back to you all with a different idea. No. That is, in my opinion, makes it seem like you did not think this through, and now you're back into a corner and you don't have the answers. And when instead of doing what you've suggested and saying, well, let's chat about this, because we've actually given this a lot of thought, and I want to make sure that maybe I'm not clearly explaining to you, or maybe you don't understand where you fit, or maybe, give some alternatives, but reiterate, let's talk about this, the two of us, so that we can come back to the team and help them see how you're going to be an asset to this. And the other thing I've done that I think has been helpful is I've called out the emotion, because oftentimes people want to hide behind, this is just not making any sense. And I see this has got you very frustrated, and I don't want you to feel frustrated at all. The goal of this is to be blank. This is where you can actually start layering in some of the values and the reasons why you're doing this. It's the goal of this is actually blank, but I see that this has you really frustrated, and I don't want that to be the case. Let's you and I find some time to talk and go through this. And oftentimes they'll be like, oh, I'm not frustrated. And they're sadly getting loud. They're like, I'm not frustrated. I'm not. And it's well, you seem very, your voice is getting very agitated. What can I do to help you? And when you turn that question on them, what can I do to help you? Then it's I understand. I just don't think. And then you get the truth. It's I don't think this is what I want to do. I don't think this is. It's okay. Well, again, let's talk about this, you and I, because it seems like there's some opportunity for us to figure out how to help you in this situation, or how to help you through, the change. But oftentimes, the more you can feel, even though you're going to feel like an imposter or feel unprepared, the more you can just address it head on in the meeting. And whether it's not confrontational and not antagonistic, you're just acknowledging the realities and giving tangible next steps. The more you can do that, the more people will rally behind you and say oh my goodness, I was kind of on the fence too, but after what I heard you say to Jim, now I understand, now I agree.
Oh my gosh, I love that you said call out the emotion. So, and obviously not in an antagonistic way, but 80% of change is working with the people. 20% of those changes really is the actual tactical thing that has to get done. But people are the biggest part of the change. And if you've got some folks that are feeling sad or anxious or nervous, it is so great to just say, hey, I see that you're nervous. And that goes a long way. I mean, that goes back to just being like, we're not robots. I like to say, we're still not robots. So let's all take a moment. Sometimes even taking a pause when things are getting heated. Hey, I could see that this is a little frustrating right now. Let's all take a couple minute break and we'll come back to the table. Go get a water, go get a coffee, go breathe some fresh air. We're going to come back and talk about these things.
I actually have one other thing that I just thought about. Can I sneak in here?
Yeah, sneak in.
One of the other things, and this one is probably borderline manipulative or sneaky, but I like to do some backdoor marketing. I like to, if I know I'm going to have a conscious because if you worked at the organization long enough and know the people well enough, sometimes Jim is not going to like this. Or Mary has said for years that she'd never want to do this, and now we're going to do it. So sometimes who's going to be the problem. And I have to go to that person and read them in early and say, listen, let's talk about this, you and I privately, where even if you get upset, like no one else can overhear us, and let's you and I figure things out. And that way I can bring them into the meeting as a champion or an advocate, and that changes the whole dynamics of the meeting. If you bring in the one person that everyone expects to get upset and they're actually happy about it because you and them have worked out how to make this work, how to overcome their fears and anxiety points or whatever, and you bring them in as an advocate, everyone else is going to be like, well, Mary likes it, and Mary's the main person who has said for years that this isn't a good idea, and I have nothing bad to say about it. And it's like, I call it manipulative, but like, it's really like, really understanding your stakeholders and then trying to make the best out of what could be a really crummy situation.
I don't think it's manipulative because I think that if that person wasn't going to be an advocate, they would still hold their feet stuck solidly in the sand. But I do think that there's a really great point to that. And that is about, if it's the right style of resistor, if that person has a lot of influence and that person has some great insight, like having those one-on-one, again, very human conversations about, I know this upsets you. I know that, you're not feeling this so much. Let's dive down to the real nitty gritty and find out why and figure out how we can work together to make this work for everybody. And a lot of times too, that helps like formulate what that change is going to be, right? It might even give us some little nuggets in order to make some tweaks here and there. So I just wrote on this, resistors to advocates.
But the one thing that's important in that scenario, and I guess in change management in general, is to not lie. I've seen people convert resistors into advocates through blatant lies, promising people things that they know aren't going to come to reality, saying that's in the future release when no future releases were planned, just things that are just deceptive. And, that will work in the short term. Like if you lie to someone and just be like, yeah, that's going to happen, they're going to believe you because why wouldn't they? And then they're going to know that's the pattern that you have. You often say things that you know not to be true. And in the future, more people who probably actually would have been advocates will be resistant because they're like, I don't know which part of this plan is the truth and which part is a lie. So.
Well, and you're just like wrecking your own credibility in that case, right? You might get that like teeny tiny short-term game, but like no empty promises. You're going to pay for that twofold, threefold, probably tenfold. I don't even know what fold, but you're paying for that later. Oh my gosh. Thomas, we have covered so much. We've only got a few minutes left. I would love to hear from you. So I kind of gave an example about my resistor interactions gone wrong. One very specifically where I spent hours upon hours with one individual trying to convince them. And it felt like convince them to please participate in this change. I bought donuts. I bought coffees. I bought lunches.
You spent money.
I was really passionate about changing this person's mind, and I didn't. I did not change their mind. Tell me about a time when maybe you had a resistor that you handled in a way that you would not choose to do today.
Oh, would not. Darn, I had an example of the opposite. Okay.
I mean, talk about like how maybe it was like a way that you approached it and
I got
refined.
So I had one time. So being a project management professional and having been a project manager in life, a scrum master, all these other things, I have had to make a ton of changes to team events and ceremonies and things like that to make the team more productive. Things over time, things change. Times that were ideal now aren't ideal later. Meetings that were necessary now aren't necessary later. And here's one time I was trying to overhaul all of our team ceremonies at the time and get rid of some things and do some new things. And most of the team was livid. And in hindsight, it was from a place of not understanding. But at the time, it felt like it was a personal attack on me. And so sometimes you have to separate the change from you as a person. But at this time, again, more junior in my career, it felt like they don't believe me. They don't trust me. They don't think I know what I am doing. And so instead of trying to better educate them on the why behind it, the goals and outcomes I'm trying to drive, and even maybe figuring out a couple smaller experiments that we could try to ease into the change, I kind of lashed out the team, and I regret this now, but I kind of was this is my job. I appreciate your input, but like, this is what I do. This is what I'm supposed to do. So it's my call. And I kind of forced it on the team. And I will say, ultimately, it was successful, but it was not successful, in week 2 or 3, as it probably could have been if the team was on board and they would have quickly started seeing the gains. It was successful in like month 5 or 6 when like I had just worn them down enough to actually give it a try. And it's something I would never do. Never use your weight or position, because sometimes you'll say, well, I'm an SVP, I'm a VP, like this is my call and I'm going to do it. And is that true? Like, absolutely. Absolutely, this is probably your call, but like nothing succeeds when one person gets behind it. You really need a team effort for something to be successful. So the more that you can get others to buy in and support you, and the more you can make them feel included in the decision, or at least the change management process, the better. So like that's one where I was really like, didn't do that quite right.
All right. Well, what I gleaned from that is that resistance isn't necessarily personal. It may feel personal. It probably will feel personal, but you got to give that moment to yourself to just take that pause and remember that they're going through something and it probably isn't you that's making them upset. And if it is you, take them aside. Let's talk about it. We'll do another podcast on conflict resolution later. All right, we've got about a minute left, and I would love to go over some key highlights that we talked about today as we talked about change management, specifically targeting resistors. So in no particular order, just remember that not all of your resistors or resistance during a change, a project, or development is a bad resistance, right? Some people are doing it just to be resistant, but a lot of people might have some curiosity and some knowledge that you could glean some insights into as well. Where you fall on the scale of resistor personally kind of depends on what role you're playing. So make sure that you're understanding what your role is in the change and how you're helping or not helping. Continuous communication, this is a great one. Early involvement is another great one to help get you through a change positively. Gaining the courage to use your internal voice to speak to those resistors, and then like knowing when to not talk to them too is also super important. Calling out the emotion, 80% of change is people, and resistors can be made into advocates if handled properly. And some of our don'ts: do not lie. Don't give those empty promises out that'll come back and bite you. And then remember that resistance isn't personal. Resistance is a part of something that people are working through, and it's not your fault. All right. This has been another podcast of The Transformation Catalyst. I'm Jackie, and this is Thomas, and we will see you on our next episode.
Thanks so much. See you later.